Who was it who was at Mount Sinai? Who was it who on that fateful day we read about in the Torah portion this morning received the Torah, the Aseret HaDibrot? At first you'd think the answer was quite obvious. Moses goes up the mountain, so we know that Moses was there. The children of Israel were at Mount Sinai. They got the 10 Commandments, and so we know that they were there. Only it's at this moment that the Talmud of Masechet Sotah tells us that there were two other groups that stood at Mount Sinai. Perhaps if not actual, then their spiritual presence was there at that time. The first group, according to the Midrash, were our children. Children who every time they are called to the Torah as a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah, reaffirm in each generation that they choose the Torah. Caleb, that's what today is all about. That's what No Pressure Tomorrow with your children will be all about. Paul and Faye, you've got some time. It'll be here before you know it. And yet it's at that moment that our rabbis also tell us that there was a second group of people at Mount Sinai at that time. Converts to Judaism, Jews by choice, who from the very beginning of our tradition, the Torah teaches us, were there at Mount Sinai. Perhaps you might say this seems like a little bit of a far stretch. What are Jews of choice doing at Mount Sinai? But for the Talmud, this almost certainly made perfect sense. After all, why would the story of Mount Sinai appear at the very same moment where we learn about Yitro, who was the Torah's first convert to Judaism? Why would they fall in the same Torah portion if not for that very reason? Our rabbis see Parashat Yitro as being a journey. They see the very opening of our Torah portion as the moment where Yitro begins his path to God. Yitro says the words, Atah yadati ki gadol Adonai. It's now at this very moment, having seen the miracles of the children of Israel, that I know why it's important to be a Jew, and I want to be a Jew. Yitro then casts his destiny with the Jewish people. He's there to get the Torah. And so he's there along with the spirit of all of those after him who are also Jews by choice and choose Judaism. Yitro, of course, would go on to be, as many of us know, the first, but not the most significant biblical convert to Judaism. That distinction goes to Ruth. Ruth, who would go on to be the great-great-great-grandmother of David Melech Yisrael, of King David. Our Torah clearly holds Jew by choice in such high esteem that the greatest king of Israel and the Messiah himself would come from the line of King David, a Jew by choice. Which leaves me with only one question that I want to leave our congregation and our community this morning. If Jews by choice can be the father-in-law of Moses, if Jews by choice can be the ancestor of the Messiah, can they be rabbis? Or better yet, can they be married to rabbis? I don't generally comment on matters of personnel related to the synagogue, but because of what we have experienced over the past 2 weeks as a community, I can't help but note how interesting it is that both of our rabbinic candidates so far are deeply connected to Jews by choice, who our tradition reminds us this morning stood with us at Mount Sinai. One is married to a Jew by choice, the other is a Jew by choice himself. Which is why there may be no better Shabbat for me to make it unequivocally clear from this bima what a wonderful thing that is. And echoing the words of Yitro himself, I want to say, Atah yadati. We should all recognize what an amazing demonstration of the resiliency and openness this is of our Jewish tradition at work, an experience that marks the enduring power of the Mount Sinai experience. Some of you may remember that a few years ago at Eitz Chaim, we had a panel where a few converts who identified as Jew by choice told us of their stories. And what I found so fascinating after that panel was the number one feedback that I got from everyone, that they had had no idea that the members of the panel had been Jews by choice. Each of the panelists was already playing an active, significant role in our community. They are our Shabbos regulars, our lay leaders, our donors, our doers. And lest we forget, this parasha reminds us, they were here with us at Mount Sinai to get the Torah at the very beginning. Many of you may have seen my 2-minute Torah video that I sent out a few weeks ago. It also received wonderful feedback. In particular, many of you conveyed to me how much you love the story about my uncle, Ralph Downard Jr., who then Vice President Biden introduced as being the more important person, the president of his synagogue, Temple Beth Shalom in Wilmington. Well, what I didn't tell you in that video was my uncle, Ralph Downard Jr., is also a Jew by choice. You might think it's strange. He wasn't born Jewish. How could he go on to be the president of a synagogue? But here's the funny thing. For me, there's never been anything more normal in my life. Until I was a rabbi, and even a little after, I literally spent every Jewish waking moment of my life learning and studying and observing alongside my uncle. And today, do you know what he and I love to do more than anything else? We love to talk synagogue shop all of the time, because it's always fun to talk about it when it's not your congregation. So I have no doubt that my uncle was on Mount Sinai getting the 10 Commandments along with the rest of us. For years, I taught a class at Rutgers Newark in the social work school about the Jewish community. And I'd always begin my class by asking the very same question. Who did they think was going to show up when they heard that a rabbi was coming to the room? And after a little bit of poking and prodding, I'd inevitably get the same answer. They thought that a man with a black hat and a big beard and payas was going to show up to class. Of course, I would then point out the obvious to them, that I had left my black hat, my payas, and my beard at home that day. But not only that, I told them that rabbis were women, rabbis were dark-skinned, rabbis were light-skinned, rabbis were born Jewish, and there were rabbis who were not born as Jews. Because that is the way that the Jewish people have always been. We are not, and we have never been, nor will we ever be a monolithic people. To that point, I want to share with you one of my favorite all-time Jewish quotes from the poet Amos Oz. Amos Oz once said that what made the Jewish people unique was that we were the first people in history not to value a bloodline. We are a text line, with the text that unites us all being the Torah at Mount Sinai. Torah, my friends, is a text that is open to everyone, regardless of whom we are born to or who we choose to be, who we choose to marry or not, or when we come to it in our lives. This is because of this midrash, where the Talmud teaches us that we all shared in the Mount Sinai experience together. Friends, Sinai, the 10 Commandments that we read about this morning, was not a singular moment in history. It is like a series of bar mitzvah photographs, with the same mountain in the backdrop that renews itself in each and every generation as different people take its photograph in front of it. Which now leads me to conclude by going back to my opening question. Who was it who was at Mount Sinai? I hope at this point, by the end of my sermon, The answer is obvious to all of you. All of us. Any human being can be there in every generation so long as we choose and we embrace Judaism. Sinai is our text line, and it is available to all of us, just as it was for Yitro, just as it was for Ruth, just as it was for our rabbinic candidates and their families. Let us never forget that choosing Judaism is the secret to our success in the past, and it will be the pathway to an enduring future. Shabbat Shalom.